Section 1 of Selections from the Principles of Philosophy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by phone. Selections from the Principles of Philosophy by René Descartes. Translated by John Veitch. Part 1 of the Principles of Human Knowledge. 1. That in order to seek truth, it is necessary once in the course of our life to doubt, as far as possible, of all things. As we were at one time children, and as we formed various judgments regarding the objects presented to our senses, when as yet we had not the entire use of our reason, numerous prejudices stand in the way of our arriving at the knowledge of truth, and of these it seems impossible for us to rid ourselves, unless we undertake, once in our lifetime, to doubt of all those things in which we may discover even the smallest suspicion of uncertainty. 2. That we ought also to consider as false all that is doubtful. Moreover, it will be useful likewise to esteem as false the things of which we shall be able to doubt, that we may with greater clearness discover what possesses most certainty and is the easiest to know. 3. That we ought not meanwhile to make use of doubt in the conduct of life. In the meantime, it is to be observed that we are to avail ourselves of this general doubt only while engaged in the contemplation of truth. For, as far as concerns the conduct of life, we are very frequently obliged to follow opinions mere probable, or even sometimes, though of two courses of action we may not perceive more probability in the one than in the other, to choose one or other, seeing the opportunity of acting would not unfrequently pass away before we could free ourselves from our doubts. 4. Why we may doubt of sensible things. Accordingly, since we now only design to apply ourselves to the investigation of truth, we will doubt, first, whether of all the things that have ever fallen under our senses, or which we have ever imagined, any one really exist. In the first place, because we know by experience that the senses sometimes err, and it would be imprudent to trust too much to what has even once deceived us. Secondly, because in dreams we perpetually seem to perceive or imagine innumerable objects which have no existence. And to one who has thus resolved upon a general doubt, there appear no marks by which he can with certainty distinguish sleep from the waking state. 5. Why we may also doubt of mathematical demonstrations. We will also doubt of the other things we have before held as most certain, even of the demonstrations of mathematics, and of their principles, which we have hitherto deemed self-evident. In the first place, because we have sometimes seen men fall into error in such matters, and admit as absolutely certain and self-evident what to us appeared false, but chiefly because we have learned that God who created us is all-powerful, for we do not yet know whether perhaps it was his will to create us so that we are always deceived, even in the things we think we know best, since this does not appear more impossible than our being occasionally deceived, which, however, as observation teaches us, is the case. And if we suppose that an all-powerful God is not the author of our being, and that we exist of ourselves by some other means, still, the less powerful we suppose our author to be, the greater reason will we have for believing that we are not so perfect as that we may not be continually deceived. 6. That we possess a free will, by which we can withhold our assent from what is doubtful, and thus avoid error. But meanwhile, whoever in the end may be the author of our being, and however powerful and deceitful he may be, we are nevertheless conscious of a freedom by which we can refrain from admitting to a place in our belief aught that is not manifestly certain and undoubted, and thus guard against ever being deceived. 7. That we cannot doubt of our existence while we doubt, and that this is the first knowledge we acquire when we philosophize in order. While we thus reject all of which we can entertain the smallest doubt, and even imagine that it is false, we easily indeed suppose that there is neither God, nor sky, nor bodies, and that we ourselves even have neither hands nor feet, nor, finally, a body, but we cannot in the same way suppose that we are not while we doubt of the truth of these things. For there is a repugnance in conceiving that what thinks does not exist at the very time when it thinks. Accordingly, the knowledge, I think, therefore I am, is the first and most certain that occurs to one who philosophizes orderly. 8. That we hence discover the distinction between the mind and the body, or between a thinking and corporeal thing. And this is the best mode of discovering the nature of the mind and its distinctness from the body. For examining that we are, while supposing, as we now do, that there is nothing really existing apart from our thought, we clearly perceive that neither extension, nor figure, nor local motion, nor anything similar that can be attributed to body, pertains to our nature, and nothing save thought alone. And consequently, that the notion we have of our mind precedes that of any corporeal thing, and is more certain, seeing we still doubt whether there is any body in existence, while we already perceive that we think. 9. What thought, cogitatio, is. By the word thought, I understand all that which so takes place in us that we of ourselves are immediately conscious of it, and accordingly, not only to understand, intelligere, entendre, to will, velle, to imagine, imaginari, but even to perceive, sentire, sentir, are here the same as to think, cogitare, penser. For if I say, I see or I walk, therefore I am, and if I understand by vision or walking the act of my eyes or of my limbs, which is the work of the body, the conclusion is not absolutely certain, because, as is often the case in dreams, I may think that I see or walk, although I do not open my eyes or move from my place, and even perhaps although I have no body. But if I mean the sensation itself, or consciousness of seeing or walking, the knowledge is manifestly certain, because it is then referred to the mind, which alone perceives or is conscious that it sees or walks. 10. That the notions which are simplest and self-evident are obscured by logical definitions, and that such are not to be reckoned among the cognitions acquired by study, but as born with us. I do not here explain several other terms which I have used, or design to use in the sequel, because their meaning seems to me sufficiently self-evident. And I frequently remarked that philosophers erred in attempting to explain, by logical definitions, such truths as are most simple and self-evident, for they thus only rendered them more obscure. And when I said that the proposition, I think, therefore I am, is of all others the first and most certain which occurs to one philosophizing orderly, I did not therefore deny that it was necessary to know what thought, existence, and certitude are, and the truth that, in order to think, it is necessary to be, and the like. But because these are the most simple notions, and such as of themselves afford the knowledge of nothing existing, I did not judge it proper there to enumerate them. 11. How we can know our mind more clearly than our body. But now that it may be discerned how the knowledge we have of the mind not only precedes, and has greater certainty, but is even clearer than that we have of the body, it must be remarked, as a matter that is highly manifest by the natural light, that to nothing no affections or qualities belong, and accordingly that where we observe certain affections, there a thing or substance to which these pertain is necessarily found. The same light also shows us that we know a thing or substance more clearly in proportion as we discover in it a greater number of qualities. Now it is manifest that we remark a greater number of qualities in our mind than in any other thing. For there is no occasion on which we know anything whatever when we are not at the same time led with much greater certainty to the knowledge of our own mind. For example, if I judge that there is an earth because I touch or see it, on the same ground and with still greater reason, I must be persuaded that my mind exists, for it may be, perhaps, that I think I touch the earth while there is one in existence, but it is not possible that I should so judge, and my mind which thus judges not exist, and the same holds good of whatever object is presented to our mind. 12. How it happens that every one does not come equally to know this. Those who have not philosophized in order have had other opinions on this subject, because they never distinguished with sufficient care the mind from the body. For although they had no difficulty in believing that they themselves existed, and that they had a higher assurance of this than any other thing, nevertheless, as they did not observe that by themselves, they ought here to understand their minds alone, when the question related to metaphysical certainty. And since, on the contrary, they rather meant their bodies which they saw with their eyes, touched with their hands, and to which they erroneously attributed the faculty of perception, they were prevented from distinctly apprehending the nature of the mind. 13. In what sense the knowledge of other things depends upon the knowledge of God. But when the mind, which thus knows itself but is still in doubt as to all other things, looks around on all sides, with a view to the farther extension of its knowledge, it first of all discovers within itself the ideas of many things, and while it simply contemplates them, and neither affirms nor denies that there is anything beyond itself corresponding to them, it is in no danger of erring. The mind also discovers certain common notions out of which it frames various demonstrations that carry conviction to such a degree as to render doubt of their truth impossible, so long as we give attention to them. For example, the mind has within itself ideas of numbers and figures, and it has likewise among its common notions the principle that if equals be added to equals, the wholes will be equal, and the like, from which it is easy to demonstrate that the three angles of a triangle are equal to two right angles, etc. Now, so long as we attend to the premises from which this conclusion and others similar to it were deduced, we feel assured of their truth. But as the mind cannot always think of these with attention, when it has the remembrance of a conclusion without recollecting the order of its deduction, and is uncertain whether the author of its being has created it of a nature that is liable to be deceived, even in what appears most evident, it perceives that there is just ground to distrust the truth of such conclusions, and that it cannot possess any certain knowledge until it has discovered its author. 14. That we may validly infer the existence of God from necessary existence being comprised in the concept we have of him. When the mind afterwards reviews the different ideas that are in it, it discovers what is by far the chief among them, that of a being omniscient, all-powerful and absolutely perfect, and it observes that in this idea there is contained not only possible and contingent existence, as in the ideas of all other things which it clearly perceives, but existence absolutely necessary and eternal. And just as because, for example, the equality of its three angles to two right angles is necessarily comprised in the idea of a triangle, the mind is firmly persuaded that the three angles of a triangle are equal to two right angles. So, from its perceiving necessary and eternal existence to be comprised in the idea which it has of an all-perfect being, it ought manifestly to conclude that this all-perfect being exists. 15. That necessary existence is not in the same way comprised in the notions which we have of other things, but merely contingent existence. The mind will be still more certain of the truth of this conclusion, if it considers that it has no idea of any other thing in which it can discover that necessary existence is contained. For, from this circumstance alone, it will discern that the idea of an all-perfect being has not been framed by itself, and that it does not represent a chimera, but a true and immutable nature, which must exist since it can only be conceived as necessarily existing. End of section 1.